Born in Illinois, more specifically Tampico, on February 6, 1911, Ronald Wilson Reagan was born to John Edward Jack Reagan and Nell Wilson Reagan. He was nicknamed Dutch by his father, saying he resembled a fat little Dutchman. During his early childhood, the Reagans lived in a series of towns and finally settled in Dixon, Illinois in 1920, where his father opened a shoe store. Ronald Reagan's father was an alcoholic who occasionally disappeared for days at a time. But now Reagan told her sons that his problem was not Jack's fault. It was a sickness that required tolerance and not condemnation. In 1928, Reagan graduated from Dixon High School, where he was a student body president and an athlete, and also performed in school plays. He was also an actor for a good while after graduation and met actor Nancy Davis, who would later become his wife and the First Lady. After college, Ronald Reagan matured from a young radio announcer into a movie star and a compelling speaker. By the 1960s, he had become a political thinker and leader, demonstrating the powers of persuasion and deep convictions that would carry him to the governorship of California and beyond. It was then, after he served his terms, Ronald Reagan decided to run in the election of 1980. After a long and grueling battle against Democratic incumbent Jimmy Carter, Reagan won the Oval Office in the end. Ronald Reagan's campaign, victory, and inauguration marked a profound change in American politics. On the campaign trail, he offered a new direction for the country. From his first day of presidency, he began to implement his core philosophy of smaller government, lower taxes, and a strong national defense. As he continued his crusades to help Americans believe in themselves again, Ronald Reagan said once on July 17th of 1980, "More than anything else, I want my candidacy to unify our country, to renew the American spirit and the sense of purpose." On March 30th, 1981, as President Reagan was exiting the Washington Hilton Hotel with several advisors, shots rang out and the Secret Service agents thrust Reagan into his limousine. Once in the car, aides discovered he had been hit. In the hospital, Reagan lost more than half of his blood. Even to this day, no one knows exactly how close to death he was. When he saw his wife Nancy, he told her, "Honey, I forgot to duck." As President Reagan recovered in the White House, he decided that the time had come to take a stand against the Soviet Union and try to transform U.S. relations with them. Ronald Reagan composed a letter and sent it to Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev, who was the Soviet leader at the time. The letter tried to reassure Brezhnev that the United States had no territorial ambitions around the world but would not ignore Soviet aggression during the time of the Cold War. Brezhnev rejected President Reagan's attempt at a personal diplomacy, but it was an approach the president would try again with other Soviet leaders with great success. During Reagan's presidency, he wrote in his presidential every day he could, and this is what we found. Transcript 5. Tuesday, December 8th, Washington, D.C. Third Soviet Summit. This is the big day. Stay meeting with small talk, and actually so is NSC, because at 10 a.m. on the South Lawn for Gorbachev's arrival. He and Raisa arrived in a limo made in Russia that's bigger than anything we have. After the usual, he and I went to the Oval Office. All our talk must be through interpreters. A good rousing meeting. We got into a debate about human rights. He thinks we have fewer of those than they do. After a while, we brought in additional members of our teams. It was a good meeting, and it's plain he really wants to more reduction of nuclear weapons. I think we'll make progress on the START treaty. After the lunch, Nancy and I met he and Risa and went up to the East Room for the signing of the INF treaty. It was TV live and really was a historic moment. Back to the cabinet room for another session, with a full house, 34 people in the room. Not nearly as a good meeting as this morning's. Transcript 6. Thursday, December 10th. A promise to end Soviet arms in Nicaragua. NSC urged me to hit Gorby with need to halt arms sold in Nicaragua and to urge him to get Vietnamese out of Cambodia. I got to agree on Nicaragua when he and I took a walk across the lawn. Our teams have been eating literally around the clock and great progress has been made. One trouble spot has to do with ship and submarine launched cruise missiles and how you can tell nuclear ones from conventional. Sunday, May 29th, Moscow, USSR, 4th Soviet Summit. On the 20-minute drive to first the Kremlin, where we were greeted by General Secretary Gorbachev and Raisa, a review of the troops, the national songs of both nations, then his welcome to us and my reply, Nancy and Raisa took a tour of the palace while he and I had a one-on-one visit. I introduced my favorite pitch on why he should give his people religious freedom. It was a good session and a nice way to launch the summit. I think we made some real progress. Now the United States and the Soviet Union were making such progress that people only dreamed of. But there was one last problem Reagan needed to stand for: the removal of the Berlin Wall / the Iron Curtain. An Iron Curtain has descended across the continent. Behind that line lie all the capitals of the ancient states of Central and Eastern Europe. Winston Churchill. The Iron Curtain took shape after World War II as a fortified border between the nations of Eastern and Western Europe. But as an idea, the Iron Curtain stood for the profound division between communism and democracy, oppression and freedom. On the 12th of June in 1987, Ronald Reagan gave a speech which is referred to his remarks on the East-West relations at the Brandenburg Gate in West Berlin. This speech is one of his most famous, which is well known for his powerful quote: "Come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." Although not immediately after, the wall was torn down, and East and West Berlin were once one again.
Come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
At the close of the Moscow summit, President Reagan and General Secretary Gorbachev issued a joint statement. It said in part that both nations were determined to prevent any war between them and disavowed any intention to achieve military superiority. The next year, the Berlin Wall came down. The Soviet Union fell apart by the end of 1991. 10 years later, the United States had reduced its nuclear arsenals by 38%, and Russia decreased their nuclear arsenal by 53%. After nearly 5 decades, the Cold War was over. Reagan won. In the end, Ronald Reagan achieved what was thought at the time to be impossible: ending the Cold War and the spread of communism in the Soviet Union. Reagan took a stand, and he would not settle, he would not give up, and he would not quit until the right thing had been done. He powered through much Soviet incompetence, but had the perseverance to keep going and ended the Cold War, which had been going on for almost 50 decades, once and for all.